The gun slipped from Dean's hand before anyone realized it wasn't a drill. Rachel's breath caught. The suspect wasn't moving, but neither was the truth. Naomi's bodycam light blinked red, recording every second that no one wanted seen. Someone whispered, "Turn it off," and silence fell heavier than the gunshot. Outside, sirens wailed like witnesses too late to speak. And in that instant, Rachel knew. Loyalty was about to cost someone their soul. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain came down like a soft warning, turning the city into a blur of lights and wet reflections. Street lamps made small suns on the pavement. Their halos trembled when cars passed. Inside the glass doors of the small grocery on Oak and 3rd, the warmth felt sudden and personal, like a hand on the shoulder. The smell of coffee and citrus filled the air. Outside, sirens threaded through the rain, distant and ordinary. Inside, the world narrowed to the small, bright rectangle of the store and the woman who stood by the frozen foods, studying a box of lasagna as if it contained the answer to something larger. She was Captain Rachel Morgan, off duty tonight by intention and by exhaustion. Her uniform lay folded in the passenger seat of her car 2 blocks away. She had traded the heavy fabric and the weight of a badge for a cardigan that did nothing to lighten the ache in her shoulders. Her hair, pulled back in a neat bun at the base of her neck, showed the small silver streak she had promised herself she would ignore. Her skin glowed under the fluorescent lights, rich, warm, a contrast to the gray outside. Her hands steady as she turned the lasagna box as if memorizing the brand. There was a softness to Rachel now that the station walls had not allowed. She moved with the private economy, careful not to draw attention, because attention, lately, felt like an accusation. She kept her voice low when she spoke to herself in the aisle, measuring words like one measures steps on a narrow ledge. Tonight was supposed to be simple, a quick dinner, laundry, sleep. Tomorrow would be another day of paperwork, community meetings, interviews, both public and private. The captain in her head never slept. She could not turn that part of herself off, even when her uniform was folded and the badge sat quiet in the glove box. An impartial voice watched, cataloging. She was 42, steady-handed, a leader who had learned to read silence as easily as a report. She believed in rules, because rules promised a world that could be measured, corrected, fixed. Yet the same voice noted her soft contradictions. She loved old soul records, the way a certain song could make her mouth ache with memory. She kept postcards from her mother inside a drawer, edges worn by fingers. She moved through life with allegiance to 2 things, service and the small, stubborn hope that the system she served could be better. Rachel picked up a pack of coffee and let her mind drift. She thought of the young man she had spoken to that morning in the neighborhood meeting, how he had looked at her with both fear and a desperate hope that adults would act on the promises they made. She thought of the boy in her community program, Turner, who had drawn a map of futures he wanted but could not yet name. She thought of the letter in the drawer at home she had not opened, official-looking, stamped, the kind of paper that made her stomach tighten. She turned the coffee over in her hands and smiled the way someone smiles at a puzzle that is almost solved. A bell chimed as the door opened. Rain and night folded into the store again. 2 officers in civilian jackets stepped in. They were young, the kind of uniforms people wore under coats, unmarked, casual authority on their hips. They moved like people used to being given space. Their voices had that easy rhythm of men who assumed the world belonged to them. Rachel felt the air change, a subtle shift that anyone who had worked long nights of patrol could name by instinct. She felt it not because she wore a badge, but because her body had learned to hear the city's tension like music. She said nothing, but the store's cameras saw her. An impartial observer would note the angle of her jaw, the small crease between her brows, the way she placed the coffee back on the shelf, and took the lasagna instead. The other voice, empathetic, close, would recognize the tiny, private acts that held her together. straightening the folded cardigan, checking her watch, rehearsing small words for a conversation she hoped to avoid. She moved with purpose, but there was a tired question at the base of her movement, the kind that asks if doing the right thing always matters when the rules are written by hands that do not look like yours. "Evening, Captain," said a voice behind her. It was polite, careful. Rachel turned. The man who had spoken was Michael, a clerk she sometimes greeted during late shifts. His smile was shy, loyal, the kind that belonged to people who liked simple kindness. His eyes flicked to her hands, to the badge peeking from where her cardigan had parted. Rachel gave him a small nod. "Evening," she answered. Her voice was ordinary and exact, the kind of voice that read reports aloud. People trusted it. Children trusted it. It had gotten her through meetings, through protests, through the long, dumb quiet of city nights. She paid and moved toward the door. The rain had stopped when she stepped outside. The world smelled like wet asphalt and possibility. She walked to her car, the same route she had taken 100 times. At the edge of the lot, a man in a dark jacket stood under the awning, cigarette smoke curling between his fingers. He watched her, with an intensity that made her stomach fold in on itself. She recognized him as Officer Dean Hale, familiar from town hall meetings, a man whose smile often looked sharper up close. He had been emphatic during a briefing last month about tough love and keeping the streets clean. He had an authority that could be comforting or raw, depending on which side of it you stood. "Captain Morgan," he said, voice flat and casual, offering a nod that could be read as respect or challenge. He had 3 other men with him, the loose fraternity of uniforms that came with swagger. Rachel felt the air compress. She released a breath she did not know she had been holding and prepared herself for the politeness the job required. They spoke about small things, shift schedules, reports, but the conversation carried edges. There were glances exchanged like short notes passed under a table. The men's laughter had a brittle quality, easily shattered. Rachel kept her answers brief. She felt the texture of micro-judgments as if they were thorns against her skin. She had faced casual hostility before, questions about her decisions, sideways comments about her softness. She had learned to file those away, to let them become neat records that did not pierce the fabric of her resolve. As she moved past them to her car, a young woman called out from across the parking lot. She was small and quick, clutching a hand to her mouth as if trying to stop a laugh. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf. She waved with a bright, guilty expression. "Rachel," she called. The name landed like a stone. Rachel's face softened. She walked toward the woman, thoughts shifting from tension to curiosity. The woman, Jenna, a neighbor who ran an after-school program, threw her arms around Rachel in a quick, messy hug. "You saved Turner today," Jenna said, breathless. "That boy would follow you anywhere. He said, you're the reason he finished his homework." Rachel felt something loosen inside her like a hidden latch opening. "Tell him to bring me a drawing next time," she said. The words were small, domestic, and true. For a moment, the city was not a courtroom or a battlefield. It was a place where simple acts mattered. The sound of a shout snapped the moment. It came from the far end of the lot, a voice rough with anger. Rachel turned and saw 2 uniformed officers moving toward a woman near the store's back entrance. She could tell even from here that the woman was black, her coat heavy, her shoulders hunched. The officer's posture was immediate and bright with accusation. Rachel walked faster. The empathetic voice in her felt the old, fierce need to step in, first to defuse, then to protect, then to understand. The impartial voice recorded facts. 3 officers, a woman, a small crowd gathering, the night tensing. Rachel's feet found the rhythm of someone who had been on the beat long enough to read the atmosphere by its small changes. She crossed toward them with an easy authority that came from years of practice. The first officer's hand was on the woman's arm. The second had his mouth open, words moving too fast to make sense. The woman's eyes darted to Rachel and then away, like someone who had been taught to keep her gaze small and fast. The captain's arrival slowed everything. People step back when a captain moves in, rituals change. The officers straightened with reflexive respect. But respect is a shallow thing. It can be called out like a guard dog, obedient for a moment, but not change from within. Rachel lifted her voice, calm but commanding. "What's going on here?" The woman's hands trembled. She spoke in a low, urgent voice. "They say I took something," she said. "They say I stole a candy bar." Her words were a small, sharp thing. The officer's stance tightened in a way that felt familiar to anyone who had watched a small accusation grow. Rachel heard the word shoplifting traded like a currency across the lot, easy and too precise. In that moment, something shifted under Rachel's feet. She felt the tilt of a larger story, the thin seam where small accusations meet bigger histories. The rain-slick city hummed around them, indifferent and ready. Rachel looked at the woman, at the officers, and then at the steady knot in her own chest. She had chosen this life because she believed she could be a bridge. Tonight, a test arrived on the size of a candy bar and the weight of a single word. She stepped forward, hands open, determined to make the space between accusation and truth a place where both could breathe. The woman's hands were still when Rachel reached her, like someone who had swallowed a storm and was trying not to cough. The officer's words were fast and hard, a clatter of accusation that filled the lot. Rachel felt the sound in her chest, a low drum that called her out of the ordinary, out of plans for lasagna and sleep. She moved between the small crowd and the officers, and for a moment the night narrowed to the small space around them. "Breath, breath, breath. Step back," Rachel said, not loud but with the kind of calm that stops people mid-sentence. The officers obeyed, but their eyes kept watch. Dean Hale watched her, like someone who had been taught to read ranks and measure loyalties. He did not smile. There was something like a question in the set of his mouth. The woman, her name would surface later, but in that first rush, she was simply a person whose hands shook, looked as if she had been running a long time. Her coat smelled faintly of rain and bread. She kept pressing her palms to her sides, as if holding herself together with two thin plates. Rachel studied her the way a captain learns to read faces. The tilt of the chin, the way the lip trembled, the rapid swallow. None of it matched the ease of a thief caught in a petty moment. There was a tightness in Rachel's gut that had nothing to do with procedure. She had seen hunger and panic before. She had seen desperation turn polite people mean. Tonight, she saw a small, raw human pushed into a corner and labeled. "Tell me what happened," Rachel said. The first officer, young, mouth too quick, rattled off the store manager's complaint. She was seen taking goods. "CCTV shows her at the shelf. We found it in her bag, took it to the register and denied it." His words were efficient, like a machine reading a file. Rachel listened, but she watched the way the other officers traded looks. They had the language of a group that could close ranks without thinking. Scenes like that had taught her to listen to the pauses between sentences. "You have a right to hold her," Dean said, voice even. It sounded like a rule, but Rachel heard something else in it, a line being drawn. For a heartbeat, she glimpsed the thin map of alliances under the surface, who had each other's backs, who expected the same favor in return. The lot felt smaller, the rain-slick asphalt a plane where histories could scratch against one another. Rachel asked to see the footage. The store manager, Michael, was nervous, fumbling with his keys. He led her to a small office where a bank of screens glowed with the store's recorded life. Owls, doors, the soft choreography of customers. Michael replayed the clip. The tape showed the woman, yes, near the candy shelf. She reached in. Then the video blurred for a second, an odd little jump like a skipped breath. When it returned, the woman was at the register, the candy tucked in her bag. The camera angle had a blind spot near the register. The pixelation at the edge made a blackout where hands might have moved. Rachel felt the shape of that blackout, as if it were physical. She paused the recording and rewound, slow and careful. She watched the motion again. The woman's face on the screen was small and quick, eyes never meeting the camera. No one walked up behind her on the tape. No one's hand reached toward the shelf. But the bag on the screen, simple, worn, looked like these things could hide small, needed treasures. The manager pressed his lips together. "It's clear enough," he said. His voice had a tilt, an unasked question disguised as certainty. In the parking lot, someone murmured, and the whisper moved like a little wave. Shoplifting. The word landed everywhere like a dropped coin, simple and sharp. The woman started to cry, not loud, but something broken coming free. Rachel felt anger and sorrow like an inward tide. She thought of Turner's map of futures and how easily those futures could be narrowed by a single incident. She stepped forward. "Hold on," she said. "We need a statement. We need to check for other footage. We need to make sure we're not missing anything." Dean's face hardened. "We've got probable cause," he replied. His hand went to his radio, though no call was incoming. He was aware of the optics, of being seen doing the right thing. He practiced. His small gesture of authority suggested that the conversation was over. That gesture irritated Rachel in a quiet way. She knew the law, and she loved it for what it promised, a way to slow things down until truth could be found. But she also knew how quickly a probable cause could become a story that swallowed nuance. She could feel the small hunger in the officers' bodies for a clean result, a neat file to close. She thought of the thin seam in her own life, the letter in the drawer at home she had not yet opened, and how unopened things often contained the largest truths. Rachel asked the woman a question that reached beyond facts. "Why would you take it?" The woman looked at her then, eyes rimmed red, and said a name, one that would become a key in Rachel's mind, but for that moment sounded like an ache. "My daughter," she said. "She's sick." Her voice broke off and the words scattered. Around them, the crowd shifted. Some faces condensed into judgment. Others softened into pity. Rachel felt the city's complicated mirror, the way strangers could be cruel and also tender. In the pause, Dean stepped forward and cuffed the woman. The metal clicked. The sound was small, but it carried like thunder. "On what charge?" Rachel asked, and the impartial voice in her cataloged the sequence. Cuffing, reading of rights, note-taking. The empathetic voice leaned close and said something harsher. That this was not only a legal act, but a moral moment, and how someone acted now would set a tone. The woman's plea about a sick daughter hung in the air like a single, bright thing. Rachel watched the officers' faces. One of them, the young man with the fast mouth, avoided meeting the woman's eyes. Dean's face remained unreadable. Michael stood apart, hands deep in pockets, looking smaller under the fluorescent office light. Rachel felt the easy boundary she had believed in wobble. She believed in the rule of law, because it made promises, but she also believed in the idea that those who enforce the law must keep a firmer hold on truth than anyone else. Tonight, that line had been blurred. She thought of her badge in the glove box of her car, the weight of it a private pressure that reminded her of choices made in empty rooms. She also thought of Turner's drawing of a future where rules helped, not hurt. Her next decision came as a quiet, steady thing. She stepped out of the office and asked the officers to hold the woman with minimal force, to treat her with dignity while they continued the investigation. She called for the case to be logged properly, for a supervisor to be notified. The officers shifted, some annoyed, some obedient. Dean's jaw tightened, a small, private warning. He said nothing, but his eyes fixed on Rachel like a ledger being marked. Back in the lot, as the woman was led toward a patrol car, a voice from the crowd rose, sharp, accusing. Someone filmed on a phone. A bystander's camera caught the scene, grainy and immediate. The phone's light made the woman's tears look like stars in a small, bitter sky. That footage, small and viral ready, would later bend the truth toward one version or another. In that instant, Rachel knew the arrest would travel beyond the lot. She felt the air shift under her feet again, a new axis forming. She watched the woman's shoulders as she walked, small, steady, exhausted. Rachel wanted to reach out, to steady that walk with something more than words. Instead, she reached for procedure and care, and for a thin, stubborn hope that the law could be used to protect as well as punish. But she also felt the cold whisper of something else, that loyalty among officers could hide a different logic, a logic that protected its own by any means. Dean's posture said enough to make Rachel's skin prickle. This was not only an incident, but a seed. When the patrol car door closed and the engine started, Rachel stood in the rain-streaked light and felt the city tighten around a new story. The woman's name would be spoken in reports and conversations. Someone would call Rachel a troublemaker for asking questions. Someone else would call her a hero for trying. The impartial voice logged these possibilities as a list. The other voice, close and raw, asked her what kind of captain she wanted to be. The answer seemed simple and heavy at once, one who followed the law and one who followed the truth. Tonight, those two might not lead to the same place. Rachel drove home with the city still clinging to her like wet cloth. The windshield blurred the streetlights into long, soft lines, and in the quiet of the car the night replayed itself in fragments. The woman's small hands, the click of cuffs, Dean Hale's unreadable face. She had told herself she would keep her temper in check, that she would let procedure do its work. But the image of the woman's tear-streaked face would not settle into a file. It demanded speech. At home, the apartment smelled like lemon oil and old books. Rachel set her bag down and walked to the window, looking at the city stitched with lights. The letter she had avoided lay on the kitchen table like an accusation. She moved to it, fingers hovering, and then left it alone. She needed another kind of thinking, one that was not tied to unopened envelopes. She made tea and sat at the small table, hands warming against the ceramic. The silence of her apartment was a different kind of weight. If the lot had been a public stage, this was a private interrogation. Her phone buzzed. Jenna sent a text. "Thank you. Rachel, you handle that so well." Rachel thumbed a reply, short and careful. She then called Turner's number to hear about the kids' school day. His voice was bright and conspiratorial, telling her about a drawing of a city with lots of trees. He sounded like a small future she could almost touch. Listening to him, Rachel felt a tenderness that had nothing to do with rank. It reminded her why she had chosen this work in the first place, but work would not leave her. The captain in her folded into focus. She began to list facts and questions. Who had watched the woman on CCTV? Michael had access. Dean had the kind of authority that could nudge outcomes. The officers who had been present were part of the same small world, a web of acquaintances and long nights. Rachel recognized the pattern. People who saw each other as comrades, whose loyalty often skipped the middle step of truth. That thought sat in her like a pebble. The next morning, Rachel went to the station. The fluorescent lights hummed with a tired cadence. In the briefing room, she saw familiar faces, people who had shared too many late calls, people who knew the shape of her decisions. Dean was there, leaning against a table with a coffee cup in his hand, looking unbothered. His presence had the effect she disliked. It made the room small and certain. When he saw her, his smile was polite, but his eyes were guarded. "You're up early," he said, voice like a flat coin. The casualness of it felt like a challenge. Rachel answered with her usual measured tone. "There's a shoplifting report that needs a proper review." She did not accuse, but she did name the things she could not leave alone. Dean's reply was smooth. "We handled it. Probable cause cuffed, processed." He shrugged as if that explained everything. The shrug moved like a small shield. Rachel kept her face even. "I asked for the footage to be checked," she said. "There was a blind spot." Dean's jaw ticked. "Blind spots happen," he said. "You can jump on every crack in the sidewalk if you want." His words were light, but his eyes landed on her as if he were measuring how far she would push. Nearby, Marcus, one of the young officers, sat at his desk with a laptop open. He had the quick mouth that had rattled off the manager's complaint. He nodded at Rachel with an awkward smile. Marcus respected rank, but he also wanted approval. Rachel noticed how his shoulders tightened when Dean spoke. It told her whose approval mattered most. At her desk, Rachel pulled the file and read the initial report. The woman's name was Naomi Williams. She was 40, according to the paperwork. A mother. The report was efficient. Item taken, manager complaint, cuffing, transport. Rachel's eyes tracked the characters on the page and then moved to the notes bracketed in the margins, small jottings about timing and witness statements. There was one notation that pulled at her. Michael had said he saw the woman take the item, but he had not personally viewed the register area on camera. Someone else had told him what they'd seen. Rachel felt the old ache of lines that left out detail. She asked to speak to Naomi's file handler. The desk sergeant, a woman named Sarah, gave her a look that said this was one of those nights where questions could be framed as inconvenient. But Rachel persisted. "We need a follow-up interview," she said, "and the store manager should come down and make a formal statement." Later, Rachel walked back to the grocery. Michael was behind his counter, looking smaller in the daylight. The store smelled like bleach and bread. Rachel greeted him, watched his mouth move, and asked steady questions. He told his version. He'd seen the woman on footage and had called it in. He kept looking at the security monitor like a man who had left a part of himself on its screen. Rachel noticed the way his hand trembled when he pointed to the timestamp. She also noticed the slackness of his shoulders when she asked who else had been in the store. "You know, Dean," Michael said, eyes dropping. "He's been looking for reasons to tighten things up around here. Folks complain about loitering. Management likes that." His voice trailed off. Rachel felt the map expand. The grocery was linked to neighborhood pressure to reduce petty crime. Dean's rhetoric about clean streets had been echoed by local businesses. The tension between public safety and dignity had been present in meetings Rachel had chaired. It had a way of asking small people to bear large consequences. Michael's words were a kind of confession. He wanted the problem solved. He wanted law and order without mess. That night, Jenna invited Rachel to a small community dinner. The room was crowded with neighbors and children, the kind of place where life felt messy and luminous. Rachel found herself both at ease and on edge. People looked to her with gratitude and expectation. They praised her for intervening. They also asked gentle, probing questions about the arrest. "Do you think it was necessary?" one woman asked. Rachel answered carefully, emphasizing process and fairness, but she also felt the ripple of worry in her chest. Over the next few days, Rachel dug. She reviewed footage frames, asked for timestamps, and requested the patrol car logs. Each file peeled back another thin layer. She found a payroll email that mentioned a neighborhood initiative to reduce petty theft with Dean's name in the CC. She found a call log where a business owner thanked Dean for taking care of a group that had been making other customers uncomfortable. These items did not prove wrongdoing, but they suggested motive, a desire for quick results, perhaps at the expense of nuance. Inside Rachel, the trust she had in colleagues split like a seam. She had friends in the force, people who would open doors for her in hard times. Marcus wanted to be liked. Sarah was principled in small, stubborn ways. Jenna was her lifeline outside the station. But the more evidence she gathered, the more she felt a private isolation. It was as if asking for truth put a thin, visible line down the middle of the station, separating those who would follow her and those who would abide by other loyalties. One evening, Dean cornered her in the stairwell. The light was dim. The stairwell smelled faintly of old paint. He looked tired. His voice dropped when he spoke. "You're making waves, Rachel," he said. "You want to be fair, but you've got to understand the politics." There was not a hint of threat in his words, only the weary arithmetic of someone comfortable with the calculus of power. Rachel met his gaze. "Politics aren't an excuse for skipping steps," she replied. Her voice was quiet but sharp. In that exchange, the station's air shifted. This was no longer about a candy bar. It was about the shape of justice and who got to define it. Dean's eyes flicked to the hallway, as if to measure how exposed they both were. After he left, Rachel leaned against the wall and felt the fatigue of a new responsibility. She thought of Naomi in the patrol car, of Turner's drawings, of the choices that split people into defenders and those defended. The station hummed with small obligations and larger silences. Rachel understood, with an uneasy clarity, that the question now was not whether she could prove Naomi's innocence or guilt, though that mattered, but whether she could hold a line where truth, not convenience, would decide. The next day felt thinner, as if the air itself were watching. Rachel had planned to finish the review and move on, to close the file with careful notes, and a sense that she had done the small good work policing allowed. Instead, a message arrived on her desk that shifted the room. "Captain Morgan, please come to processing. Sergeant Alvarez." The line was short and official. The paper on her desk seemed suddenly heavier. Processing smelled like coffee and old paper. The fluorescent lights buzzed low. The walls were tired beige. Naomi sat inside a small interview room, hands folded on her lap, eyes empty in a way that made Rachel's chest ache. Seeing her there, no longer as a figure in a video, but as a person, felt different. Naomi's coat was buttoned up tight. The rain had dried on the sleeves in pale streaks. She looked up when Rachel entered, and for a small moment, the world narrowed to the two of them. "You came," Naomi said. Her voice was small but steady. She had not told anyone her story at the scene. Now, within these thin walls, the air between them was an ultraviolet light that made small truths show. Rachel sat opposite her. "I wanted to follow the procedure," she said. "I wanted the tape reviewed." Naomi smiled in a way that was not quite a smile. "That's what good officers do," she said. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin leather wallet. She set it on the table and opened it in a precise, careful way. Inside, where a credit card might sit, was a badge. The gold reflected the fluorescent lights and made a small, brave sun on the table. It read, "Captain Naomi Williams, Internal Affairs." Rachel felt the room tilt. The badge was not the small brass token of the street. It had an authority that lived in other rooms, in closed files, and whispered investigations. Her throat tightened. Naomi's hands did not shake as she closed the wallet. "I work internally," she said. "I was off duty. I was buying cough drops for my daughter. I never expected to be put in cuffs." The news landed like a thrown stone. Rachel thought of the patrol car, the way Naomi had been led to it, the way the bystander's phone had caught the moment. The betrayal in the air became sharper, less a rumor than a choice. Naomi's badge meant that this was not an ordinary arrest. It meant there were questions not only about a candy bar, but about who knew what and when. "Why didn't you say anything at the scene?" Rachel asked, voice low. Naomi's eyes closed for a breath. "I said I was a captain," she whispered. They laughed. Dean laughed. Marcus laughed. He told me to quiet down. It got worse when I said internal affairs. Rachel felt cold. The station's hallways seemed to lean in. If Naomi had told them and been mocked, then the act had shifted from mistake to willful dismissal. Naomi's hands folded on the table again. "I came that night specifically because I was following a lead," she said. "I had information from a community member about a pattern, stops, and arrests targeted at Black residents. I wanted to see the neighborhood, to talk to people. I took off my jacket. I didn't want attention. I didn't expect to be handled like a common thief." The twist cut two ways. On one hand, Naomi's presence as an internal affairs captain complicated everything. She was a colleague, an officer sworn to investigate misconduct. On the other, the manner of her arrest suggested a deliberate, personal slight, an attempt to humiliate or silence her. Rachel's mind flipped through the possibilities and landed on a bitterness she had felt before. Loyalty to the group could shield cruelty. "Who arrested you?" she asked. Dean led it. Naomi said. The name fell like a bell. Rachel had expected many things, but not this clarity and not the slow wash of betrayal that came with it. Naomi's eyes searched Rachel's face as if asking whether she believed her. "He knew," Naomi added. "He saw my badge when I said it. He knew. He wanted me out of the lot, quiet in the back of a cruiser while he did what he wanted." Rachel remembered their exchange by the car, a courteous nod, a practiced politeness. Memory rearranged itself like a map where new rivers appeared. The casualness of Dean's greeting no longer seemed an accident, but a mask. The stairwell conversation returned to her mind, the quiet warning in Dean's words. It was no longer just politics. It might be active protection of something darker. Why would he do that? Rachel asked, though she suspected the answer. Power protects itself, she thought, a simple law with violent effects. Naomi's jaw tightened. "Because I'm looking into patterns that make people uncomfortable," she said. "Because I asked for footage and patrol logs. Because I asked awkward questions about stops? Because I am asking who benefits when people get pushed out of a neighborhood. Some of those who benefit have badges. The revelation pushed Rachel into an odd solitude. She had already felt a separation from some colleagues, but this drew a clearer line. Internal affairs was supposed to be quiet, surgical, remove the infected parts, heal the hole. Naomi's being handcuffed in public was not a misstep, it was a message. The message was aimed at the people who asked questions. Rachel left the interview room with Naomi's badge like a weight in her pocket, and the hallway seemed colder. At her desk, she opened a folder she had not touched for a week, a set of emails she had flagged. One, mundane in appearance, was a chain of messages about a neighborhood cleanup initiative. Dean's name appeared in the CC line. One of the messages included a line from a local business owner thanking Dean for reducing loitering. There was a pattern, a ledger of favors and quiet rewards. But now, with Naomi's badge laid bare, the ledger became a map of motives. She called Marcus into her office. The young officer appeared, face bright, with the eagerness of someone who wanted to be chosen. Rachel placed Naomi's badge on the table in front of him without a preface. He glanced at it and then away, as if avoiding looking at the truth in metal. "Did you know Naomi was internal?" Rachel asked. Marcus swallowed. "I know, Captain. I didn't know." His voice had the thinness of a man who was learning that ignorance might no longer be enough. Rachel watched him. There was fear there, less about discipline and more about being pulled into a current he had not chosen. "Who told you about the footage?" she pressed. "Who said it was clear?" Marcus fidgeted. "Michael said he saw her. He said it was clear. He wanted it handled. Dean said to process it." Rachel felt the betrayal gather shape, like smoke finding wind. Michael, the store manager, had been the first to name the theft. Dean had been the hand that moved the scene forward. Marcus had been the young muscle. The thread ran through them, a line that suggested a plan rather than a fluke. She left Marcus with a warning not to act on impulse. Outside the office window, the city moved, unaware that a small, crucial secret had been revealed. A captain had been cuffed, and the cuffing had not been an accident. The knowledge changed the stakes. Rachel's role expanded from investigator to protector of a truth that some in her own department might prefer buried. Naomi's badge had reshaped the map of loyalties in a single motion. That night, Rachel sat at her kitchen table and opened the letter she had not yet read. Inside was a notice about a promotion review, a reminder that the forces of paperwork and politics had always been close to her life. She looked up at the window, at the city lights that had been witness to other small cruelties. The first twist had landed. Her quiet, procedural fight had become personal. Someone she had shared hallways with had been willing to use the badge and the law as tools of humiliation. Now, Rachel had to decide how much she would risk to unroll what had been hidden. Rachel woke before dawn, a thin light leaking under the curtains like an uninvited thought. Sleep had left her in pieces. Dreams cut with the image of Naomi's badge and the click of cuffs. She made coffee, hands moving by habit, and let the quiet fill around her like a held breath. There were choices to be made, and the kind of tired calculation that comes when a person knows the map has changed. Her phone buzzed with messages that had arrived overnight. "Jenna, are you okay? Marcus, call me when you can." A message from Naomi. "Thank you. Stay careful." The curt finality of Naomi's line made Rachel's chest tighten. Naomi was both colleague and witness. She was also now someone who had been publicly humiliated. The city's rumor mills were not patient. In a few hours, the tape would be shared, debated, recut into opinions. The patrol car image, the phone footage, the grainy clip from the store, each could be turned into evidence or into story. Rachel understood how quickly narrative could be weaponized. At the station, the air felt charged. People who passed her desk offered small looks, some kind, some distant. There were quiet, sideways conversations. Sergeant Alvarez called her into a closed room. His face was flat, paper-thin with the strain of balancing departmental politics. "We have supervisors calling," he said. "Internal affairs is already involved." This one's going to the chief." He rested his hand on the folder between them. "Be careful, Captain. This is bigger than the lot." Bigger. The word had the taste of warning. Rachel felt the station's walls press inward. She thought of the promotion notice still tucked in her kitchen drawer, proof that the bureaucracy had been patient, waiting for loyalty or caution to win. Now the same machine might measure her curiosity as recklessness. She had to decide how much she would push, enough to expose the pattern or enough to protect herself and Naomi from a department that could turn on them. Outside, the neighborhood had already become loud. The phone footage had started to circulate. Someone in the crowd had uploaded the grainy clip with a caption that left no room for nuance. The city's small forums picked it up, and within hours strangers were forming judgments. Rachel watched as the narrative bifurcated into two camps: those who saw Naomi's cuffing as shameful abuse, and those who accepted Dean's version, a clean arrest of a petty thief. The binary angered her because it ignored the seam of human complexity. But narratives do not care for seams, they prefer edges. At midday, Rachel found herself at Naomi's side in an interview room once more. Naomi looked tired but resolute. Her uniform was folded within a small bag, a sliver of blue, like a promise. She told Rachel about calls she had made the week before, soft tips from residents about repeated stops, and an impression that certain people were being targeted by officers with too much latitude. Naomi had begun documenting complaints, asking for logs, and making quiet notes. "I thought I could do it quietly," she said. "I thought I could make a paper trail. I did not expect Dean to make an example of me." The words were an accusation wrapped in disbelief. Rachel thought of Dean leaning in the stairwell, the casualness of his warning. Now his actions felt less like casual protection and more like deliberate containment. If he could humiliate Naomi, he could warn others not to pry. The department's internal culture had an unspoken cost. Curiosity could be sanctioned. Rachel felt the old law's promise warp into a system that rewarded silence. Then came the external pressure. The chief called a press conference. The mayor's office sent inquiries. The neighborhood association demanded answers. Rachel watched the calendar fill with meetings that had the wrong kind of urgency, performative solutions at the expense of careful truth-seeking. The public face of the department was assembling, rehearsing lines that would calm and control. Rachel knew these scripts well. She also knew the danger. Scripted calm could obscure real harm. At a morning briefing, Dean stood at the front of the room like someone ready for performance. He spoke about upholding standards and procedural correctness. His words were measured, polished. Beneath the polish, a current ran: control, image, self-protection. When he met Rachel's eyes, his smile was small and contained. It did not reach his eyes. The smile felt like a coin flipped between two positions: ally, adversary. Rachel's inner life became a terrain of sharp choices. She could step forward, openly demand independent review, and risk being labeled trouble by those who controlled promotions, assignments, and the whisper network that could make a career plummet. Or she could move more quietly, collect evidence, build alliances outside the station, bring Naomi's case to the right people in a way that would be hard to dismiss. Quiet work would take time. It would also need trust, and trust was thin. Her next move was to call Jenna and ask her to gather neighborhood testimonies. Jenna agreed, and the next evening the small community center filled with people who had stories to tell. They spoke softly at first, about stops, about the way officers spoke to their young men, about a pattern of quick detentions that left people shaken. Their voices swelled with time, and Rachel felt the pressure of their need. Each story was a bead in a chain that, when held together, could become a stronger thing than a single accusation. But danger shadowed each step. Anonymous notes began to appear on Rachel's car, short, typed warnings that implied consequences for stirring trouble. A journalist left a voicemail asking for an angle, and Rachel hung up twice before calling back. Marcus, who wanted to be helpful, now avoided her desk and kept his head down. Naomi's placement on administrative leave was announced with bureaucratic tenderness. She had been temporarily reassigned pending investigation. The phrasing felt like a shroud. Naomi had protected the department's internal mechanisms by joining them. Now, those mechanisms were being used against her. At night, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, the promotion notice beside her like a small, innocent thing from another life. Her reflection in the window looked older than she felt. Turner's drawing of a city with trees flashed in her mind. How fragile futures could be. She knew she would have to risk a career, perhaps friendships, perhaps the simple peace of being left alone. She also knew that to do nothing would be a betrayal of the belief that had led her into service, that law could be an instrument of fairness. The choice narrowed into a single sharp question. Would she protect the system that protected her comfort, or would she protect the people the system was meant to serve? The question had no easy answer. It had, instead, stakes that would not remain private. The longer she waited, the more time Dean had to shape the story to rebuild narrative walls around his actions. Time, Rachel realized, was not neutral. It favored those who could control the record. She made a small plan. Quietly, she would collect the footage that had not been reviewed, log witness statements, and secure Naomi's original notes. She would not go to the chief first. She would not make a public accusation. But she would act. It was the kind of middle ground that asked her to be both brave and cunning. The station hummed with small betrayals and loyalties. Rachel felt the echo of Naomi's line, "Stay careful," like both counsel and challenge. As she prepared, a new text arrived from an unknown number. "We know what you're doing. Stop." The message read like gravel. Rachel's hands tightened around her phone. Threats were no longer theoretical, they were threaded into the air like another warning. The city outside her window did not sleep. Neither, evidently, did the fight she had stepped into. The hearing room smelled of dry paper and cheap coffee. Lights hung low and white, catching the dust that never seemed to settle in places where people came to sort truth from story. The room was full, neighbors, reporters, a handful of officers, and a row of faces that watched like hawks. Rachel sat at a small table with Naomi beside her. Naomi's uniform lay folded like a promise. Her badge glinted in the light, small and stubborn. An impartial voice recorded the scene. Microphones, a camera lens, the mayor's suit, the chief's practice calm. The empathetic voice felt the room as a living thing, full of held breath, a place where the city's pulse could be measured. Outside, someone had pasted flyers calling for justice. Inside, the air felt tight, with expectation. Dean stood to speak first. He had the practiced cadence of a man trained to lead crowds, with words that soothed and steered. His smile was smooth. He told the story the way he always had: a clean arrest, a clear procedure, a captain misidentified as a suspect. He spoke of policy, of upholding standards. People leaned forward, some nodding because his speech matched the image they wanted to keep. Rachel listened, and as she listened, the knot inside her tightened into a hunger for truth. She had spent nights gathering footage, collecting notes, saving timestamps. She had asked for small loyalties: Marcus's honesty, Michael's records, Sarah's administrative logs. The fight had cost her quiet days and a steady sleep, but it had given her a small, bright stack of facts. The footage from a different angle, a payroll message, a recorded voicemail. When Rachel stood, it was with a calm she had learned in many hard rooms. She walked to the podium and placed a small, battered laptop where everyone could see it. The screen lit like a small altar. For a moment, there was only the hum of people breathing. "I asked for the full footage," she said. Her voice was simple and precise. Not the clip someone wanted shown. Not the part that makes it easy. "I asked for everything." She hit play. At first, the tape was ordinary customers, an aisle, a woman moving with a purpose. Then the new angle appeared. Michael at the register, not looking at the camera, but looking around the lot. His hand moved, too quick for an untrained eye, toward a small packet on the counter. The footage showed him slipping something, a small bar, into a shopping bag carried by none other than an officer who had been outside that night. The grainy clip showed hands, practiced and quick, passing an item as if in a practice choreography. The item made its way into the woman's bag on the other camera's blind spot. It was a small, ugly motion, but It changed everything. A gasp ran through the room. Naomi's face went pale and then steadied. Dean's jaw tightened as the screen showed him visible in another frame, talking across the lot. The footage cut to a shaky phone video taken by a bystander, someone capturing the final act, and over it the audio that Marcus had kept, a whispered conversation in the lot where Dean said, "Make it stick. Teach them not to come back." Marcus had sent the file quietly to Rachel the night he decided he could no longer be comfortable with silence. The impartial voice listed facts, timestamps, emails, phone records. The empathetic voice felt the crowd, the slow, hot swell of anger that comes when a lie meets light. People who had said nothing now shouted. Reporters leaned forward, pens moving like tiny soldiers. Dean rose like a wounded animal. He reached for a script, but the lines no longer fit. He spoke of stress and misunderstanding. He spoke of protecting the neighborhood. His words boiled down into something smaller, fear dressed as policy. He accused Rachel of grandstanding, of weaponizing footage. It was a reflex, an attempt to turn the room away from what the screen had shown. Then came Sarah's step forward. At first she lingered in the back, face flushed. She had been the one Rachel suspected of hesitation. The room hushed as she came to the microphone. Her voice trembled. "I leaked the internal note," she said. The words were a confession that broke like glass. "I told Dean you were digging. I thought," she swallowed, "I thought it would quiet things. I was scared. I was wrong." Her betrayal landed like a stone and then cracked open. People turned. Rachel felt a hollow ache where trust had been. But Sarah did not stop there. She placed an envelope on the table, a small folder of emails between Dean and several business owners, conversations that read like favors traded for arrests. The trail of messages was dull and ordinary, scheduling, thanks, promises, but together they painted a pattern, a network where convenience had become a currency. Marcus stood next, pale but steady. He told the room how he had recorded Dean's words, how he had watched the logic change in small meetings, how loyalty had become a wall that hid cruelty. "I thought I was protecting my team," he said. "I was protecting something wrong." His admission felt like a second twist, less dramatic than Naomi's badge, but sharper because it came from within, from a young officer who chose truth over comradeship. Naomi rose and the room leaned near. She spoke softly without flourish. She told them why she had been there that night, because names had been given to her office, because parents had whispered who was targeted, because she believed her duty was to see. She described being mocked, cuffed, and made small. Her words were spare, each one like a clean blade. She said, "I wore a badge to protect the truth. I never wanted the sight of it to become a threat." The chief's face was a mask of official pain. The mayor pressed his lips together. The cameras rolled. The city was watching and truth moved like a tide. Dean's defense collapsed under the weight of footage and email threads. He tried to call witnesses to show his own version, but the room had shifted. Betrayal had been exposed. The small conspiracy to push away problems by fabricating probable cause and the casual cruelty of those who believed they could engineer outcomes. The mayor ordered an immediate administrative hold. The chief called for a formal internal review. Dean's hands, once steady on the podium, trembled. As the officers escorted him from the room, he turned and for a second looked at Rachel. There was no anger now, only a tired, raw surprise. His betrayal lay open like an old wound. People whispered his name like a once revered thing now broken. When the room emptied, Naomi and Rachel stood alone for a moment under the bright lights. The impartial voice would note the procedural steps that followed. Files opened, statements taken, administrative moves. The empathetic voice felt the small, quiet things. Naomi's fingers finding Rachel's and squeezing, the way Rachel's shoulders loosened with relief that was not joy, but a low, bitter gratitude. "You did the right thing," Naomi said, soft. Rachel thought of the choices she had made, how far she had pushed, how she had risked career and peace, and how those risks had opened a wound and also, finally, a path. "We did what the truth asked," she answered. Her voice trembled, not with triumph but with the weight of what had been shown. that systems could be gamed, that loyalty could become a shield for cruelty, and that courage sometimes required stepping alone into light. Outside, the city seemed the same, cars moving, streetlights humming, yet something had shifted. The immediate battle was won. The deeper work had only begun. People would hold their breath as investigations moved slowly through bureaucracy. Some officers would be punished. Others would change. Some allies would be lost. The moral question remained. Could a system that had been complicit repair itself? Rachel walked out into the rain, the wet air sharp and clean. She felt the sting of cold, and in it a strange clarity. The captain she wanted to be was no longer an abstract. She had chosen truth, and now she would live with its consequences, good and hard alike. Naomi walked beside her, badge tucked back into its small wallet like a quiet promise. They did not speak much as they moved through the city. The silence was not empty, it was full of new possibilities and old scars. The landscape of their work had been changed, not by a single act, but by the slow, stubborn insistence that truth, when gathered and shown, could still alter the map. The night closed around them, and in that darkness there was, at last, a thin, honest light. The weeks that followed moved with the slow, steady rhythm of official machinery. There were interviews, administrative hearings, and long stacks of reports that smelled faintly of toner and old decisions. Dean was placed on leave, then suspended. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation that unfolded like a careful hand pulling at a loose thread. Some officers were reassigned. Michael closed his store for a few days, and then reopened with the kind of polite distance that had the shape of shame. Marcus took a leave of absence. His hands shaking the first time he sat at a kitchen table without the pressure of silence pressing down on him. Sarah kept her job but avoided public rooms for a while, doing paperwork in corners and learning how to live with the mark of having chosen honesty at a cost. Rachel moved through the days like someone walking through fog who had found a strand of rope to hold. People thanked her, neighbors, parents, even strangers who had watched the hearing on local news, but gratitude never felt like a full answer to the unease inside her. Naomi returned to work in a different capacity, transferred temporarily to a desk that let her keep her investigations close. She thanked Rachel quietly, with a look that carried both relief and the weight of what had been endured. The mayor held a public forum where community members could speak directly to department leadership. Turner came with Jenna and handed Rachel a small drawing, trees, a wide street, smiling people. It was a piece of paper that smelled faintly of crayons and hope. Rachel kept it on her kitchen table, a small, stubborn proof that the future she worried about still existed in fragile forms. Despite the outward motion, not everything healed. Some officers who had been close to Dean closed ranks. Their loyalty hardened into a wall that would not be easily dismantled. Rumors shifted and shaped into new forms. Some said Dean had been unfairly targeted, others that Rachel had been reckless. The station hummed with the low sound of people recalibrating their alliances. Rachel found old friends greeting her with polite emptiness, and she felt the sting of being tested by people she had trusted. Change, she learned, did not arrive tidy. It came in jagged pieces that needed to be put together one by one. At night, she read the investigation files with careful hunger. Some parts were clear, the footage, the emails, the recorded conversations. Other parts were more ambiguous. Conversations where intent could be argued both ways, decisions made in pressure and fear. She knew the law could name acts, but it could not always name motives. Motives lived in small rooms and private decisions, and sometimes they never fully surfaced. The work of repair would not be dramatic headlines. It would be slow, quiet reforms, meetings where policy was rewritten and training was scheduled, the kind of detail that did not make for good television, but mattered more. One evening, Naomi asked Rachel to have coffee in a small cafe near the river. The light was soft and the chairs gave a gentle creak when they sat. Naomi stirred sugar into her cup with a slow, steady hand. She looked different than she had in the glare of the hearing, softer, somehow steadier. People will talk, she said, but actions will matter more. We can make sure that the evidence we gathered turns into change, not just punishment. Rachel nodded. I want that, she said. I want a policy that prevents what happened to you and closes the spaces where people can be hurt without notice. Naomi smiled. And I want officers who know that their badge doesn't give them permission to be cruel, she said. It gives them responsibility. That's harder work. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Rachel thought of Turner's drawing and of the small acts that mattered most, the way a child's homework made him feel seen, the quick response to a neighbor in need. She thought of the promotion notice that had once tempted her to seek advancement and realized she wanted something different now. Not titles that sealed doors, but influence that opened them. The moral weight of what had happened lived painfully within her. She had risked career prospects and friendships. She had acted against the tide of comfortable silence that had led to truth, but truth had not felt like a clean victory. It had been messy, bittersweet. She found herself awake, sometimes in the small hours, thinking of the woman in the lot before she was known, hands clenched, shoulders hunched, and wondering how many small moments went unseen that never resulted in public revelations. One night, after a long day of meetings, Rachel drove to the grocery where it had started. The neon sign hummed, the same small light, over the door, the same parking lot where so much had shifted. Michael greeted her with a nod, softer than before. He handed her a small paper bag, an apology clumsy and real. You did the right thing, he said, voice low. Rachel accepted it without comment, because words felt small and necessary both. In the months that followed, training sessions were implemented. Supervisors were held to clearer standards. Internal Affairs created a hotline for officers to report concerns anonymously. The mayor and chief promised reforms that had teeth, audits of stop records, community oversight boards. Change arrived like slow paint, layer by careful layer. It would not disappear the fear that had been sown by years of small decisions, but it made a beginning. Rachel's life did not return to what it had been. She was promoted in influence, if not immediately in rank. She was given a new role that let her work directly with community outreach and policy review. It was not the easy promotion she had once envisioned, but it felt right. Naomi continued to push cases quietly, becoming both a thorn and a necessary force within the department. Marcus returned to duty eventually, his hands steadier and his conscience lighter. Some relationships were mended over long lunches and awkward apologies, others were quietly set aside. In the quiet of her kitchen one rainy evening, Rachel held Turner's drawing and thought of the small things that held people together, the word sorry when it needed to be spoken, the practice of listening without immediate judgment, the courage to risk a comfortable place for a truer one. She thought of the language of power and how often it hid under the name of protection. She thought of Naomi's badge and the way it had reframed what had happened, how the sight of authority had been used both to protect and to wound. She did not imagine the system would ever be perfect. She had learned that institutions are made of people and people carry both light and shadow. The true work, she understood, would always be to choose again and again the better course where it was hard. To be brave was not a single act, but a habit. It meant speaking when it was easier to stay silent, listening when it would be simpler to judge, and protecting those who had no shield. When she walked to her window and looked out at the city, lights smudged by rain, she felt a quietness that was not triumph but steady purpose. There would be new fights, new compromises, and fresh disappointments. But she had seen what happened when courage and careful work moved together. A lie could be exposed, a habit could be changed, and a small child's drawing could still contain the promise of trees. She folded the drawing and placed it in a drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it close. The work would continue, not in headlines, but in meetings and policy drafts, in the patient insistence that truth be the foundation of action. Rachel breathed in, steady and ready for the next day, knowing that the moral cost of justice was ongoing and that she had chosen, in the end, to pay it. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.